We're live, NFL week number 7 back here on the RAS Picks YouTube channel. Fantastic week, full slate of games, only 2 teams on the bye, which means we got 15 games to talk about. And let's start with it. In this episode, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about every side, every total, every game, and give you all the information I think is the most important to help you make a decision for the games coming up this week. Start off with the Denver Broncos on the road at the New Orleans Saints. Denver, a 2.5-point favorite with a total of 37.5. This game took a wild turn back Monday afternoon as the injury report initially came out. It was the unofficial injury report, but we got news for the Saints. As it's looking right now, as I'm talking here at 9:02 a.m. Pacific on a Wednesday, the New Orleans Saints are going to be without Olave and Shaheed. There's a chance that Taysom Hill will miss again as well. So this is now a Saints team that is going to have to turn to the likes of Mason Tipton and Bub Means to run the offense with Spencer Rattler starting under center for the injured Derek Carr behind a hurt center and a hurt right guard, both of whom may also miss this game as well. And if you want to add a little bit of insult to all of the injuries, you still have Alvin Kamara operating at less than 100% as he is working through 3 different specific injuries. And so this game was at a pick'em. As this news comes out, as word starts swirling around about how ugly this could be for the Saints, we start to see this number trickle out, and we are now up to 2.5. Now, as I'm sitting here and kind of looking at this, I'm like, how in the world could Bo Nix ever be laying points on the road to a team? What we have seen from Bo Nix last week heavily aided in garbage time. When I'm talking Bo Nix, outside of the Bucs game, where it was just an injury-riddled secondary that he was throwing against in an awesome spot, neutral game states all season, he has been horrendous. And there's just no willingness to push the ball downfield. There's no willingness to threaten deep. Everything is tight. Everything is condensed. There's not a lot there for Bo Nix in just a neutral game state pocket. I could never get out and lay this number with the Denver Broncos where it is. And then honestly, it looks like it could trend a little bit higher because the injuries are that bad for the Saints. What decision is going to be forced to be made is, do you, if potentially a 3 shows, just bite the bullet and go with it with the Saints in this spot because the number is so far out of line? That's kind of my only thought process with this game at the moment. And I mean, even looking internally, we had some pretty crazy preseason numbers on the Saints that made this game on another planet. That's now been obviously adjusted down a ton with the Derek Carr injury, which we saw graded heavily in the market last week, which was about a 5-point adjustment. Even looking at like adjusted numbers this year, looking at other models we source, like there's just no way that we're getting to Broncos minus 2.5 unless it's just a substantial downgrade for all of these injuries, which I think is a certainly fair case to make and one that can be justified. If you're looking at just pure closing line models this season, you're at Saints minus 4, and that's already accounting for 1 game without Carr and the big adjustment. So you're dropping that lower with the injuries and adjusting it a little further. It's just never getting out this far. And so as ugly as it is for the Saints, like Bo Nix on the road, potentially laying a field goal, I'm just never getting there. So I haven't bet it yet. We haven't had a release on this or anything yet. It's at 2.5. It's trending towards 3. Let's see if it hits 3, and let's see what this looks like a little bit later. But it's a bit of a tricky game to talk about, just given that we're going to get some substantial injury news here in the next hour or 2. But that's my impression of looking at it. Denver as a negative as well will very, very likely be without Patrick Surtain. What I don't quite understand is both the Saints, who have Olave in the protocol, and you have Pat Surtain in the protocol. If both of those guys need 5 days to clear, and this is a Thursday game, how are they clearing for this? I don't quite understand how they're still labeled as having a chance to play. I would fully expect both to miss. So Denver Broncos without Pat Surtain last week looked very different. So never getting to 3 here. Never getting to 3 here, in my opinion, on this. Say hello to everybody in the chat. More than 250 folks watching live on YouTube. Rich says, Glad to have you back on at lunchtime. Wednesday morning, 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 p.m. Eastern time is when I'm live every single week during the NFL seasons. Last week was the exception, as I was very, very under the weather and forced the show to go a little bit later. It caught Garrett off guard. I apologize for that. Just had to push it back. Was not feeling well enough to do the show and did it later Wednesday last week. A lot of great feedback. Thanks for everybody commenting. You guys said that, hey, we prefer this time. There's a lot of Thursday shows that come out in the morning. Don't want you to go on Thursday because we're listening to those. You go Wednesday, you go first, you set us up for the week. That's been the goal of the show. So good to have so many comments coming in. Good morning to Diana. I'm looking at Faduni, who I hope I'm saying the name right. I feel like I always end up mentioning it wrong, so I apologize if I'm getting that wrong. You can correct me in the chat. He says the coffee is brewing. The wife pulled some magic, dropped the little dog off at daycare because it's been a few days of rain here in the Pacific Northwest. Stopped by the Starbucks. We're loaded up. We are good to go. Jane Nava says, did you get the medicine ball? No, but I got some kind of a hot latte here that's going down real nice. And so good things happening with the coffee situation. Ernesto says, love the show. Appreciate all the insight you provide. Thanks very much for joining in for another show. Lots of Bears comments coming in as well. Lance is just telling straight lies here. I'm not sure where that comment is coming from, Lance, but good to have you back for another show. Pat Wilkins says a busy week. Every single week is always busy. Andrew D says, I'm finally getting to listen live. Longtime listener and Jets fan. Here we go. Do you purchase other professional bettors picks, or is this just amongst you guys? We follow a ton of different services. We follow a ton of different groups. We try to stay as connected to everything going on as we can. And so definitely we do, Andrew. Question number 2 from Andrew. How much money needs to be bet for a line to move on and off key numbers? Sometimes you say this line hit 7 for a little while and then quickly return to 6.5. There isn't a specific number for that to require it happening. It depends on the time of the week and how far we are into the market maturing. It's going to take a whole lot more on Friday, Saturday, Sunday than it might Sunday night or Monday morning. So if you're wondering what the specific dollar amount would be, it would be hard to give a specific number on that, but it's not something that's easy and simple to do. It certainly requires accounts with influence more than just a straight amount of money being bet in the vast majority of cases. Another question, do we trust Bo Nix here, even though the long list? That was my whole point of that, and no, definitely not. Will Taysom Hill play? That's still a little bit early to be determined. We'll get that news a little bit later, but that would be a boost as he's making a big difference for the Saints offense as well. Paul says, can you take a moment to say what is considered a low total and how many points do you need to make numbers play on the underdog? I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that, Paul, but in terms of average totals this year, we're running right around 43. And so once you're getting into these mid-high 30s, that's certainly on the lower end of the totals. How many points do you need to make a numbers play on the underdog? I'm guessing you need with the Saints specifically. I would happily look at the 3 here if it happens to show. A few more comments. Ian says your content is the best. That's the mood for the week. Appreciate it very much. And Changing 500 says cut a work meeting short to be ready for the show. That's the spirit I like to see. Zahari is no rain on the Algarve coast in Portugal. What a beautiful spot to be. Carlo Jordan as well saying thank you for being back. Before we get into the Sunday games, want to remind everybody the NFL service on the season is 33-23-2. 58.9% on the season. If you're interested in following along with the bets, following along with the plays, you can head over to raspicks.com for all the details, as the price has been dropped down for the remainder of the season for anybody who wants to follow on the service. Sunday game, New England against Jacksonville. Jags, 5.5-point favorites. Total in this game, 42.5. This is going to be a game that is played in Wembley Stadium, not Hotspur Stadium. And there's a couple things that you need to know when you're looking at this game. The first is the weather report. 89% chance of rain during the game. Winds sustained speed around 15 miles per hour. Gusts up to 40 miles per hour. Where this becomes tricky to gauge and kind of figure out is in Wembley Stadium specifically, there is a retractable roof, but it does not close the entirety of the field. There is a gap over the field in the roof. It makes it very hard to figure out how much wind is going to be down at field level. It makes it very hard to figure out how much rain is going to get to field level. Last year, when games were played at Wembley, it was the surface that was better liked by players because it is that natural grass surface, where at Hotspur Stadium, they're playing on what was described by Bills players as rock hard concrete. And so that's a positive, but it is a different surface, for this season. Because of how poor the conditions were left following the NFL game, it was essentially destroyed. They went and created a new surface to play on in the offseason, which is a retractable surface, which will be rolled out over the main surface for the NFL game this weekend. Where this gets really hard to handicap and really tough to figure out is not only is there a wind element, anytime games gets over 20 miles per hour in wind, we see totals come crashing down. The average close is at 38. Average points scored is at 37. It's incredibly difficult to move the football when there's winds of those speeds. But with the semi-roof over Wembley, I don't know how to handicap that. I don't know what we're getting at field level. I don't know what we're getting with rain, and I don't know what we're getting with footing on the surface. This could, in theory, be a repeat of the Brazil game. If it's wet, if it's ugly, if the new surface is different, or I don't know what we're getting into. I still don't quite understand why Brazil was so bad. I know there was the JJ Watt tweet about soccer pitches being different. I messaged a good friend of mine as a greenskeeper at a course in Saskatchewan. Messaged him. I'm like, what's going on here? Like, you got to explain this to me. Like, how can it be so bad? He didn't know. I don't have answers for this one. It could be very different. Now, the Jags are playing their second game in London on the back-to-back. There's going to be a lot of reference to what they did last year against the Buffalo Bills. I went back and refreshed on that game, and what I found was the Bills left late Thursday from Buffalo, and they forced themselves, based on Sean McDermott's sports science, to stay up all night and go straight into a practice on Friday. All the interviews from players post-game was about how poor of a strategy that was and how they all felt extremely unnatural. They all felt out of sync and out of their element. And the game started incredibly slow for the Bills. They fell behind. It was sloppy. It was mistakes. That partially was the Jags' advantage for playing back-to-back. But I think it was equally a bigger gaffe by the Bills that probably had more to do with it potentially than the Jags benefiting from the back-to-back spot. Now, in this game specifically, it's a little bit odd because you have Drake May making his second ever start. You have the Pats leaving late week again. They're scheduled to fly out Thursday. I can't imagine they do the thing where they force everybody to stay up and pound coffees to be ready for practice. We don't know. We'll see what happens. But they are flying out later in the week. So something to keep an eye on as you begin to hear it and you begin to see it. So again, a bit of a weird field and stadium and position spot. And then when it comes to just the logistics of travel, you would think there's an advantage for the Jags, but there's a little bit of an unknown about how much last year's performance played in. As you just look at this matchup specifically, let's say the conditions on the field at field level are timid. We'll put timid as kind of the adjective, and let's say it's like lesser. And we're just looking at this from a matchup perspective. Last week, Evan Lazar, who covers the Patriots and works for the team, was talking about the outcome of the Pats offense against the Texans. And his biggest takeaway in the film analysis was how Drake May looked very comfortable when facing man coverage from the Texans. The Jacksonville Jaguars play the highest rate of man coverage in the NFL, and those numbers are skewed because they went incredibly zone heavy against the Texans and a weird shift in game plans. But if you think about the Pats adding a more explosive element to their offense with May under center, and now he's facing a lot of man coverage, which is where he looked comfortable, this going from the Texans defense to the Jags defense, which isn't stopping anybody, could be a good spot for him to look perhaps better than he did against the Texans, which I thought was an adequate performance to begin with. Now, how much does Tyson Campbell, the number one defensive back returning for the Jags, maybe offset this? So long-winded game breakdown, lots to kind of go around here and think about. 5.5 is getting, I think, to kind of peak Jags pricing. I'm not there yet with the Pats. Initially, I thought this was a game earlier in the week as we did the Sunday stream and what we were looking at that could be a potential game that could fly over. Now with the weather and the elements and the field conditions, I want no part of that. And so I don't know what to do with this. I'm kind of waiting on the side to see where this goes. But I could maybe have my arm twisted for the Pats if this gets to 6 or higher, and we see how this goes the rest of the week. Seattle on the road at the Atlanta Falcons. Falcons a 3-point favorite with a total of 51, and this is a number that's coming in. So I'm looking at the odds screen now. I see 3 even money across the board. There has been back and forth disagreement by pro groups on this game so far. We've seen 2.5 go to 3, 3 go back to 2.5. There was movement Monday and Tuesday. There was more movement this morning. So we're playing back and forth tennis here effectively with groups going back and forth between the 2.5 and 3. I want to give Seattle some consideration in this spot, and I'm giving them a bit of a pass for what we saw on Thursday Night Football because that was the new coaching staff in their first season. You have the new head coach, the new OC, trying to come up with a game plan on a short week, a situation where teams historically really struggle. The Giants game that the Seahawks played the Sunday prior in week 5 was immediately after playing the Lions on Monday Night Football. The Lions matched up very well with the defensive front. The Giants game after the travel was the big letdown spot. So the Seahawks not only perhaps benefited early season from the strength of schedule, but these last 3 weeks, I think they're made out to look worse than they are. Now, in this matchup specifically, with the Seahawks having so many defensive injuries up front, Atlanta has a very clear path to run the football in this spot. They ran it very well last week against Carolina. It's not going to be a lot more resistance against the Seahawks in this game with all the injuries that Seattle has. What I look forward to being an advantage for Seattle in this game is Geno Smith throwing the football because he's finally not going to be under pressure. Facing the 49ers defensive front, facing the Giants, very underrated defensive front, facing the Lions defensive front. I mean, it's been tough the last couple of weeks for Geno. He's performed very well because of how nimble he's become in the pocket with these subtle movements. But this is the first time in about a month where Geno's going into a game and he's not going to be under pressure because the Falcons do not have any pass rush up front. And they have so little pass rush that the Carolina Panthers O-line, which has been struggling all season, in the game last week, had their best graded performance. The offensive linemen graded among the best of the team as a whole. The offensive line for Carolina just completely came to life in a way we haven't seen them. And I think you're going to see the same from the Seahawks. Where it gets interesting is Geno Smith in his time with Seattle has performed significantly better when he's playing indoors and on turf than he has playing outdoors, which is odd because Seattle at Lumen is an outdoor stadium. Geno Smith indoor splits in 37 games so far this season, or so far in his career in Seattle, games that have been played indoors, 8.2 yards per attempt, 108 passer rating, plus 0.19 EPA. Compared to outdoors, 7.0 yards per attempt, 88 passer rating, minus 0.03 EPA per play. So he's been a very different quarterback for whatever reason when he's playing indoors, and this is obviously going to be an indoor game being played in Atlanta. I also wonder how much the telegraphed game plan last week benefited the San Francisco 49ers. All week, Ryan Grubb talked about how he wanted to get back to running the football. He wanted to push Kenneth Walker. 49ers knew it was coming. 49ers were prepared for it. 49ers shut it down. We haven't heard a pretty distinct definition of what the Seahawks want in this game. They do have the highest pass rate of any team so far through the season in the NFL. If this has to be a passing game for Geno and the Seahawks, they have to go in throwing against this Falcons defense. I have a bit of concern that they come into the game and try stick with that run first game plan, which would be the lesser ideal of the two scenarios against this Falcons defense. That certainly is a concern. It's got to be a passing game for Seattle. And so at 3 for Seattle, I would have a lean here to the Seahawks. But we'll see what this number does, as there's been a lot of back and forth in this matchup. But certainly would lean here towards the Seahawks and would not want to get into laying 3 with Atlanta. Tennessee on the road at the Buffalo Bills. Bills 9-point favorites with a total of 41. This is too much, but I'm not betting Will Levis on the road against these corners. If Will Levis couldn't get anything going against the Colts defense, I mean, it was shocking. And I definitely liked the Titans offense last week. And I was like, this is the spot for the Titans offense to show something, to show anything, because everybody has been showing something against the Colts defense. And the fact that he ends with under 100 passing yards, Ridley doesn't have a catch. It's so bad right now on offense for Tennessee. And I have no explanation for it, because everything the coaches are saying during the week would lead you and me and everybody to believing that they're trying to make a change and they're trying to do things right. And the reality of it is that just never translates to what they're doing on the field. And so if nothing's working against the Colts, and now Levis is going on the road to take on these Bills outside corners who have been awesome all season, I don't know what the path for success here is for the Titans offense. They're going to have to keep it in the middle of the field, which is where the Bills defense has been weakest. But now the Bills get back Bernard and they get back Johnson, and Rapp is playing at a very high level. And all of a sudden, the spine that was the weakness for the Bills defense all of a sudden looks like it's turning into a bit of a strength. And matched up against the Titans, who are going to be without Tajay Spears in this game and going to be relying on Tony Pollard out of the backfield, it just seems like this is an offense that is not this week going to sort things out and figure it out. Now, the price here that we're getting to for the Bills is very high. I mean, they closed -7 against Arizona. They closed -4.5 against Jacksonville. We saw the Eagles at 9 against the Browns last week take on a little bit of money. Can we get to 9 for the Bills against the Titans? If you're having the Titans graded out below the Browns by a wide margin, which I think would be tough to get to, maybe. But other than that, it's really tough to justify much higher than this number. So you can't really play it at this number. But man, it's concerning and bad for Tennessee. And if they don't go to Mason Rudolph sooner rather than later, I'm not sure if this coaching staff holds on to the offensive side of the locker room. It's so bad with Levis right now that I just don't know. If you told me Rudolph was starting in this game later in the week, may have a different opinion in this spot. But at this number, it's a pass on the side and it's a pass on the total. Cincinnati -6.5 with the total of 42 on the road at Cleveland. A lot of things that make week 7 difficult is you have matchups like this, or matchups like Buffalo and Tennessee, where you're at a number and you're like, you have to play the dog. And then you start looking at what the dog is at this point in the season, where historically just the bottoms of teams really start to fall out around this point of the season. And you transition into the later season team that you get. Maybe there's coaching changes or QB changes. Like Cleveland fits another one. Looking at this game, it was a 2-point move up after Amari Cooper was traded. That's probably rich for Amari Cooper, because we didn't see the Bills upgraded in that spot with the trade. We just saw the Browns downgraded. And it certainly is a downgrade, because you're taking away the best wide receiver from this offense, and this offense has yet to score 20 points on the season. Cincinnati's moving up and down the field, with the exception of last week against the New York Giants. They're now laying 6.5 on the road against Cleveland, in Cleveland, where the Browns defense has played better. there's no way that you're getting comfortable laying 6.5 with the Bengals here. It's an inflated price. It's a premium number. Everything points to taking the 6.5 with the dog, but how can you bet Cleveland in this spot? I know it's a controversial thing for sharps to come out and say that, and they're hearing me say it, and they're like, wow, you should just be betting the number. But like at some point, you're looking at teams like Cleveland or Tennessee or Las Vegas, or there's an element of quit going on around the team. There's an element of quit within the locker room, and there's a level of quarterback play that, although it's being put in like 25-year level context of poor play, it might not be reflective of how bad it is going to be. And so, again, this is another one of those games this week, of a handful of them, where like 6.5 is a crazy premium for the Bengals. But how do you back the Browns given what is going on with that offense and what's going on inside that locker room with all the issues they have? So it would definitely be Browns or nothing, but I'm never comfortable taking Cleveland in this spot at home, given how big of a disaster it is right now inside that locker room. If you've been enjoying the show and you're enjoying the content and you're enjoying the daily podcast, if you're coming back to the channel every single week and you're not yet subscribed, subscribe button's down below. You can hit the thumbs up as well. Helps out the video. If you're watching this after the live stream and you're catching up on the show, in the comment section down below, leave a comment with thoughts on the week, thoughts on any games, anything that you want answered. Happy to get followed up with all those comments as they come through. Appreciate everybody again for being part of the live streams, being part of the live chats. Keep the questions coming in. Would be happy to get to all of them as we go through. But if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, would love it if you hit the subscribe button down below. Houston on the road at the Green Bay Packers. Packers a 3-point favorite with a total of 47.5. Like the Packers last week, do not like them this week at this number. Would have a lean here to Houston at +3. And let me check the odds screen to see if that is still something that's fair to say. And I would say that it is, as Chris Buckeye Bet Online all still showing 3 for the Houston Texans. Now, the Green Bay Packers are a very noisy team to this point in the season. They had their get-right game on offense last week against the Cardinals. Love is back to 100%. He's taking more snaps under center. He's got his receivers back. The team is operating at a level close to what we expected them to be coming into the season. They had to deal with the injury. They had to deal with Malik Willis starting a couple games. They had to deal with some scheduling quirks. You can't control who is on your schedule. You can control how you play against the schedule, I think, is an important thing to take away as we get to the point of the season where strength of schedule starts to matter. The Green Bay Packers, between the two quarterbacks this year, have wins against Indy, Tennessee, LA, and Arizona. They have faced very weak defenses when their offense has looked best. They're stepping up in class in a big way against this Texans team, against this Texans pass rush, and against this Texans blitz, as the Packers offense, regardless of quarterback, against the blitz has struggled more than usual this season. And so I see this game and this matchup where I think there's a path for the Texans defense to lean on with how much pressure they generate naturally, but also how they time up some blitzes to have success in this game, at least slowing down the Packers offense enough to allow the Texans offense to stay competitive and have a chance to win this game. It was evident to me that Joe Mixon coming back last week just opens up a lot for this Texans offense. They operated for a few weeks without a ground game. Now that you have Mixon back, that's a big addition because it gives the Texans an out on some of these downs. If Slowick gets stubborn and continues to push the runs on first and second down, at least it's a more efficient version of doing so. It allows the pass game more options as well. It just is a much different looking offense when you have Mixon in the backfield. And I think that that's substantial in the absence of Nico Collins moving forward for this team. And so as I'm looking at this game and I'm looking at where we're getting price-wise and what we're looking at from a number standpoint for this game specifically, was looking right around the pick'em for a lot of the preseason numbers. For the in-season numbers, again, multiple models that we're looking at are right around the pick'em. From a closing line model perspective, which is obviously influenced by the Willis stats, Houston is a small favorite. And so any kind of context that I look at in this game, whether it's preseason numbers to now and how much we're perhaps getting adjusted up in favor of Green Bay, or I'm looking at in-season numbers to where they get, it feels to me like the Packers are getting a lot of credit for the win last week, which rightfully so they should with the offense coming around. But I just wonder, like, we talked about how great of a spot for the Packers that was last week against a dome team outdoors, against a defense that plays a ton of zone. That was a great spot for Green Bay. This week, I don't feel like it is as much, and I think the matchups here give Houston some outs. So at the field goal of 3, would definitely lean here towards the Houston Texans in this spot. Next game up is the Miami Dolphins +3 on the road at the Indianapolis Colts with a total of 44. Give me the Dolphins here in this spot, as ugly as it might be. This is a pretty steep number for the Colts to get to. They're going to have Richardson back. There's a chance that Taylor will return as well. The wide receivers went from IR bound to playing. They're going to be back here too. There's a chance DeForest Buckner returns. We'll see how the injury report goes. But in this spot, I just think about pricing wise, like what we're getting to here, where we're at with this Colts team, and what we're looking at here. Now, the Dolphins closed -2.5 with Huntley at home to the Tennessee Titans in week 5. The Colts closed +2.5 on the road at Tennessee last week. The difference in ratings that we're getting there is pretty notable from the closing line price, especially now given the fact that we're out to Indy -3 with the Dolphins coming in off of the bye. Yeah, it's a big bump up for the Colts in this spot, who barely scraped by a Titans team we just talked about having so many offensive struggles, despite getting all the injury luck in the world possible going their way in the lead up to that game. I don't know if the switch to Richardson is moving the number a whole lot for me on the side. In this spot specifically, what I like about Miami is at least, and maybe I'm falling for coach speak in this spot, and maybe I'm misreading the situation, everything coming out of the bye has been very positive to how Huntley has responded and stepped up in the offense, and he's willing to take more on. I think the game against the Pats was a good indication of what the Dolphins want to do with their ground game. I thought Wright mixed in with Mostert was great. I think that's a nice dynamic. I think against this Colts defense, they're going to have a very clear path to run the football. I think against this Colts defense, even if they want to get the playmakers moving around and a little bit tighter, putting these linebackers in a bit of a bind to make those throws comfortable for Huntley, I think that's going to work out pretty well too. And so for me, this is a number that has been bumped up too much to 3, looking to the Dolphins here at +3 for a spot that I like and a matchup that I like as well. Detroit on the road at the Minnesota Vikings. Vikings a 2-point favorite with a total in this game of 50 currently this morning. So it's a big premium that's being put on the Vikings now as we're looking at, I mean, just to put it in perspective, if we go back to preseason numbers to kind of give an illustration of what we're looking at, we had 3 different models that we sourced preseason for numbers. This was Detroit -6. We're now Vikings -2. And I'm not saying that those numbers are gospel and the exact indication of precisely what it would be, but could go down to win totals. You could go down to a lot of different numbers to look at and say, like, okay, this is a big difference for Minnesota pricing going into week 7 from where we were in week 1. And the question becomes, from a handicapping perspective, is how much of this is justified? In my opinion, it's all justified. And I think there's an argument to be made that this is a number that could potentially be pushed up a little bit higher yet, even with the extreme premium that is being put on this price. I think about how well Minnesota is coached, and it's notable. It's arguably the most well-coached team in the entire NFC. I mean, it has been massive all season. This is a huge home field advantage. It's arguably the biggest home field advantage in the NFL. This is a week out of the bye for Minnesota, which is a huge benefit. And this is also a spot where potentially Aaron Jones and TJ Hawkinson both return to play for this offense, which would be a huge bump as they're getting contributions from obviously Justin Jefferson, but secondary and third level wide receivers too that weren't as expected in the preseason. And so the offense and the way that it is trending is fantastic. The defense is playing at a very high level. You have the home field advantage. You have the bye week. I mean, it makes sense to get where we are. And I think the question is should it be higher? The biggest factor to me in that is whether or not we see Aaron Jones on the field. I can't help but watch that Jets game and the highlights and read the reports out of it. Once Aaron Jones went out, this was a different Vikings offense. And so before I could get comfortable clicking submit on Minnesota, we need to know that Aaron Jones has a decent chance of playing. I think there's two things to consider that are a bit of contradicting viewpoints to watch during the rest of the week. There was a video of him at practice. The Vikings had their out of bye workout. They were outdoors. He was running around and he looked fine. But the Vikings added a running back yesterday in trade or signing. And usually when you see something added at a position where there's an injury, that casts a bit of shadow of doubt over whether or not that injured player is ready to come back and play. Aaron Jones is going to matter a ton. And I wonder what the Lions are now going to do defensively without Hutchinson in this pass rush. And I say Jones is going to matter a ton because if the Lions elect to go with extra defensive ends or extra linebackers to make up for the glaring hole that Hutchinson leaves, Aaron Jones is going to be essential in exploiting any of those matchups that are put in the front seven by the Lions. And that's a very important chess piece in this matchup for the Vikings and O'Connell to move around and to get different looks and exploit and set things up for Darnold. So I think it's a very interesting back and forth. Something I'll say, and it is in no way to diminish how important Aiden Hutchinson is, because his absence to this Lions defense could be one domino that makes several other pieces crumble and has a trickle-down effect throughout. I mean, his importance is substantial. The number of second or third string tackles that Hutchinson has faced this season is pretty crazy. It's been every game except one this season where it's been Hutchinson lined up across either a second or third stringer. Leads the lead in sacks. The pressure rate has been off the charts. Now I start to wonder, though, is there maybe a bigger effect than just the name value and the talent not being there for the Lions? Because the Lions defense is rated at a level that is accounting for all of these pressures and accounting for all of these sacks, but I don't know if it's weighted properly for matchup. And so going forward for the Lions defense, if you're without Hutchinson, and all of a sudden you're playing offensive lines that don't have the same injury luck working in the Lions' favor, is that drop-off a little bit bigger than it is being made out to be? And I think that could potentially be the case. Last thing I'll say in this matchup, the Jared Goff betting checklist is something I've been on since 2017. Is he on the road? Is he under pressure? Is he laying points? If you get 2 of 3 as a yes, that typically leads to making a good bet on the opponent. And in this game, is he on the road? Yes. Is he going to be under pressure? Yes. You get the 2 of the 3. He's not laying points. His numbers under pressure from a clean pocket, even though they've got better in his time in Detroit because he's playing behind a much better offensive line than the offensive line he had in LA, it's still who he is. It's still who he is as a passer and a quarterback. The Lions can certainly scheme around that and play around that, but it's still Jared Goff when forced under pressure, making worse decisions relative to the baseline of when he's kept clean, and I think that matters too. This has been brought up. I'm taking a sip of coffee. So I don't know when I say it. Apparently I've said it now. I say all of the sudden, and I guess it's all of a sudden, but my the sound basically the same. And so the number of little like idioms that I say that have been pointed out, or little sayings that I have, or quirks in language. I get DMs, like honestly, a couple times a month where it's like you say this, the way that I say New Orleans or New Orleans or how that's pronounced. I mean, you're dealing with the Saskatchewan accent at full speed here for an hour and 20 minutes on a Wednesday and 20 minutes every single day. I honestly, I don't know when I say this, and I don't know which one it actually, I know it's all of a sudden, but the the when I say it are kind of the same thing. And so I appreciate it being pointed out. It always makes me laugh. I honestly, I try to be better doing it, and I try to pronounce it the right way, but it's hard. It's hard to switch once you get it. The switch in like the first days of podcasting from offense and defense to offense and defense was a lot of work, and it took a lot of time to get that right. And so now that we're on to like secondary phrases like this, I've probably said interesting 10 times this podcast. I've probably said all the way around 3 or 4 times this podcast. I mean, it just happens. And so I honestly, I really do appreciate it being pointed out. I try to do it better. It's tough. It's tough to do it on the fly. Next game up, Philadelphia Eagles -3 with a total of 43 on the road at the New York Giants. This was as high as 4. 4s were taken out. 3.5s were taken out. It's been a very sharp opinion on the New York Giants from different bettors all week as this number's come in. There's been a couple big positives for the Giants in the last couple of weeks. One has been Brian Daboll's play calling. I think we've seen a big shift in what he is able to do. Really the last 3 or 4 weeks. It's been awesome from Daboll, even though the scoreboard might not fully reflect it, just what's being seen on the field with the motions, the creativity he's using to get guys open. It's been great from Daboll. Defensively, the defensive line up front, we talked about that havoc rate stat the last couple of weeks. They just continue to dominate up front. It's a really, really good front four. They're getting some secondary pass rush help. It is disguising how bad and how problematic the secondary is in a big way. And so you're having this very bend but do not break style of defense employed by Shane Bowen, but they're just winning up front. And that's alleviating a ton of pressure from the issues they have on the back end. Now, as positive as things have been for the Giants, I am really conflicted about what in the world is going on with Philadelphia. So the Sirianni stuff is on the side here because I don't think anybody truly knows what went on with the outburst at the end of the game. It's hard not to realize the same thing happened against Kansas City last year, and the locker room resulted in some turmoil after that as the end of season finished in a complete disaster. Now, there's a Reddit thread where there's a guy saying, like, I was the guy in the stands and it's no big deal. Like, I don't think Sirianni's coming out and publicly apologizing for something that was about running the football. Either way this goes, the optics of it look terrible. And clearly something's going on, and it's not the first time Sirianni has done this. I find it so strange that now there's articles being written about Sirianni calling both offensive and defensive plays, not entirely on the defense, but he is meddling in defensive play calling, which seems odd. And when we're thinking about meddling in with the offense, a lot of really good breakdowns this week were kind of tracking the Kellen Moore progress of explanation of what he wanted the offense to be. So going back to week 1, Kellen Moore wanted the offense. And this was not just Moore saying it. It was Hurt saying it. It was other guys saying it. It was described as being 95% new. And that was a very intriguing comment because what happened with the Eagles last year was they were a shotgun-based offense that did not target the middle of the field, relied on Jalen Hurts' legs to bail them out in key spots, and then got very predictable in what they were doing with outside routes. The Eagles now have reverted to exactly that same offense. And what's concerning to me now with the Eagles is coming out of the bye, it was almost like they, instead of progressing forward in that Browns game plan, they like took a step back the other direction towards what they were last year. And I don't know if that's Sirianni driving this a certain direction. I don't know what's going on. And the fact that this number is coming in, again, we're talking about a very difficult week 7 for betting, because in these matchups, there's just a lot of weird kind of underlying things going on with teams. Like Philadelphia laying 3 at the Giants in this spot is kind of a crazy low number. But there's so much that might be going on within the Eagles offense that perhaps this is now the Eagles. Like if this is the Eagles trending back to what they were at the end of last year, this number is fully justified and should be shorter. If the Eagles ever trend back towards what we saw early season, I mean, I'm looking at models that aren't even ours that are producing numbers that are closer to 6 and 6.5 in this spot. And so again, it's a tough week full of these games where you just don't quite know what you're getting from the team because there's more at play than just what is being said. And so it kind of turns into a bit of a stay away, because if this turns into another game for the Eagles offense where it's Hurts sitting in shotgun, where it's A.J. Brown basically reduced to go routes on the outside, and all of a sudden you now have these offensive line injuries creeping in, and you don't have Dallas Goedert to exploit the middle of the field, I think it makes it very easy for the Giants defensively to put together a game plan that fits within the scheme of what they run. And that could continue on with this Giants kind of buy that's existing in the market so far right now. And I have a problem trying to figure out what the Eagles are at this point, as this week has really kind of made me change my tone and view on them, as what's being reported is so unusual from the team and the coach specifically. Las Vegas on the road at the LA Rams. Rams a 7-point favorite with a total of 43. So just from a behind the curtain kind of scenes point of view, on Sunday night, I wrote up the Rams at -5.5 as a possible to consider before we went on a lot of our calls. And we do those every Sunday night. We do them every Monday morning. We do them every Tuesday morning. It's conference calls and discussions to go back and forth where everyone has a list of possibles. We talk about it and we provide positives, negatives. And the Rams were certainly on a short list. And just the way that I was looking at this was the Rams have faced 3 of the 4 teams in the best division in football who faced the Rams as either like the best or better version of themselves and continued to progress to look better. And the opposing schedule of quarterbacks that the Rams have faced on defense, which has been their big issue, has been brutal too. And so the Rams going from facing Goff, Murray, Purdy, Williams, Love to start the season to now facing Aidan O'Connell with extra time to prepare. I mean, it's a night and day weight off the shoulders sigh of relief. Last week for the Raiders, Aidan O'Connell was so conservative. And what's interesting is, there we go again, in the week leading up to the game, we heard Antonio Pierce just hammer over and over and over and over again how he doesn't want turnovers. And what it led to was just like the tightest game plan possible. Post-game, Antonio Pierce is criticizing the offense for not opening things up more. So there's a big divide going on in Las Vegas right now. The offense just doesn't look right. It's a quarterback change to something that's not going to make a difference. And now Devontae Adams is out of the picture officially. It's tough. Now, the Rams made a change in their secondary scheme 2 weeks ago, and they moved guys around at positions. They switched things up. They also got back Darius Williams, who's their best cover corner. Definitely in the time off, there's been commentary about how they've been working on improving the secondary and the communication roles and who is doing what. And I think it's showing through and making a bit of a difference. I don't think this Rams secondary is nearly as bad as it was in the early part of the season. And so as we're looking at the Rams here in this in this spot and in this week, when I'm doing the write-up on Sunday night, the number looks pretty appealing. What surprised me was off the Davante Adams news, this number jumped up to 7. I can't play it at 7. I wouldn't play it at 7. And I don't know if the move to 7 that was clearly correlated to the news because it happened right at the same time is fully justified, because I feel like Davante Adams has been away from the Raiders for the better part of 2 to 3 weeks in terms of actually contributing to their number and contributing to their rating. And so that extra bump up kind of now makes this a tough number to play, because the Rams realistically are still going to be without Cooper Kupp for this game. I think he has a much better chance of returning next week, and they're going to get Puka Nacua back at earliest next week, but I still think that's further off in the future as well. And so the Rams going to cover 5.5 is one thing. Now to get them without those guys to cover more than a touchdown, it gets to a different story altogether. And so I wouldn't play it at 7, but I just wanted to paint the picture into what I was looking at in this game and what we were looking at in this spot. And so that's another one of these games that unfortunately moved before we got to the live stream here on Sunday. Adam, I know you've mentioned this a couple times on Twitter. Is the Philly fan base and media overblowing the situation, or is it actually affecting the locker room? Watching the locker room after Sirianni bringing the kids to the podium and knowing the Philly fan base, I think it's being overblown myself as a rollover from last year. I don't know, honestly, and that's part of the problem. The fact that any head coach did it, let alone did it twice, is a pretty big embarrassment to the team and the fans overall. And so there's no way I don't think that it is received well. And the players are like, that's awesome, he did it. I know he brings his kids to press conferences often. It felt like an odd time to do that, given the line of questioning. But I don't know what to make of it. I really don't. But it's hard for me to look at what happened last year and how it unraveled, and to see it happening. It just is such a weird and unprofessional spot. I don't know what to make of it. But you could be right that it is overblown. I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. Carolina on the road at the Washington Commanders. Commanders an 8-point favorite with a total of 51.5. It's been one-way money on the over. It makes sense. It's up about 4 points since open. I see the Panthers as having a track to offensive success here, but I also see the same thing for the Commanders. When I think about the Carolina Panthers, last week they benefited from the Atlanta Falcons, who were labeled by folks in the industry much smarter than I am as having a negative pass rush. And that's when the Carolina Panthers offensive line finally looked good and finally showed a level of competence we have not seen from them for the duration of the season. Carolina was able to run the ball a little bit, and against this Washington Commanders front, who now is without Allen and is potentially without 2 edge rushers for this game, I think the Panthers O-line is going to grade out well again. I think Andy Dalton's going to have time in the pocket. I think Andy Dalton's going to have success throwing against this Commanders secondary. And if Carolina wants to run the football, I think the path is there for them to do it as well. The question is, when you're looking at the side and the total, this game is going to be completely decided for both bets on, can the Panthers get any stops? Looking at the last 3 weeks, the answer is no. They've conceded 34, 36, and 38 points. The way that these numbers are trending for the Carolina Panthers would have them finishing the season as the worst defense in the league. And with 0 pass rush up front for Carolina, I mean, no push whatsoever, and no push in the run game whatsoever. If Washington does get back Brian Robinson, I think anything is on the table here for the Commanders on offense, and we see another outburst like they've had 3 of the last 4 weeks. Jaden Daniels is very first read dependent, but against this Panthers defense, those first reads, they're going to be open for him, and he's going to connect on them because it's not a big test here going up against this Panthers defense for the Commanders. Now, if we start talking about just like the range of the number here as the Commanders get out to an 8-point favorite, We've had discussions about the Commanders as a 3.5-point favorite against a team like the Browns, and there was disagreement in that number. This was 8.5. It's easy to understand why there's disagreement in this number coming back a little bit. I think there's a really wide range of outcomes for what you get from this game that make it, again, very difficult to bet, because if the Panthers defense looks like it has the last couple weeks and doesn't step up at all, it could be a no punt game for Washington, honestly. Like it's pretty much anything Washington wants is in play. But if this is viewed as the Commanders going from a touchdown dog last week in a rivalry game and losing, and coming into this game now laying 8 and potentially a bit of a letdown, and the Panthers now playing a defense that is in their weight class, so to speak, for their offensive level of play, and all of a sudden it flips the game script a bit for the Commanders and forces them to play a little bit of a catch-up, and it allows the Panthers to have a little bit more of a predictive pass rush plan, then all of a sudden this number that is a brand new kind of like pricing range and category for the Commanders gets to be viewed as really, really high. And my sentiment on the Sunday show that we did here on the live stream on the channel was certainly, I'm looking at 8.5. I'm like, that's a massive number for the Commanders to be laying. But again, there's nothing positive that you can take into this matchup from the Panthers defensive perspective. It's that bad. Drew says everybody off the Panthers now. And I think that that's another thing that's an interesting comment. As we think about the Raiders game, there was Panthers 7 with Young. Dalton gets put in. It goes down to 5. They win. And there's a clear premium put on them the next week. And that carried over. And we saw kind of the premium go away last week against the Falcons. And now it's like there's 0, or it's like deflated, if anything. So it changes for sure. And now it's like you're looking at this and it's obviously inflated for the Commanders, just from a numbers perspective of what we're looking at internally. The highest number that I see is 8 flat from one of the models that we reference. Everything else was considerably lower. And so I completely agree with that for sure. You're nuts. Carolina's defense is non-existent. Washington will score on every possession. I think I just said it could be a no punt game for Washington if the Panthers defense looks as bad as it has. So I don't think I was trying to say otherwise. Carolina's defense is non-existent. I think there is a small chance that this is a letdown for Washington coming out of the Ravens game. Josh says, I asked you a few weeks about your sentiment on the Panthers over 5.5 wins. I tailed you. How are you feeling now? Not good. Not good, Josh. Let me pull up the schedule quick. I know the schedule, and part of the reason why we released it was because the schedule was just unthinkably easy all season. This game is one of the games that was circled that obviously turned out to look a lot more difficult than it is. Outside of the Chiefs, which is coming up in mid-November, there's certainly an opportunity for them to get some wins. 6 is looking like it's going to be very tough to get to. So it's looking pretty grim there. I'm not gonna sugarcoat that one anymore. I think realistically they needed to snag out of that Raiders game maybe one more in this stretch, and they weren't close to doing so. And so optimism is very low for the Panthers win total. Josh, I'm sorry, I don't have anything positive to say there. Kansas City on the road at the San Francisco 49ers. 49ers, 8.5 favorite, total 47. I think I'm a little bit surprised in how much back and forth disagreement we had internally on this game. I thought Sunday night there was a pretty good chance that we would have something on the Chiefs in this spot. These two teams have played each other quite often, and they've also played each other in spots where it's been the same coaching staff back and forth too. And Andy Reid has had his way every time with the 49ers defense, Super Bowl, regular season. It's the 5th meeting in 7 years for these two. Andy has won all 4 of them, 2 of them obviously being Super Bowls. And so there's a ton of familiarity between the two coaches There's a ton of familiarity between the two staffs. The Chiefs are coming out of the bye, but that is largely negated by the 49ers coming off of the Thursday night game where they got their offense looking right. There's some intricacies within the matchup that I think make this a little bit different. And I think it makes sense to start on the Chiefs defensive side. The 49ers in the offseason had a pretty big campaign to try get Spags away from the Chiefs and get him to run his defense. They also tried to get the Chiefs defensive backs coach, who's awesome, to go over, and he turned the job down. So there's some maybe a bit of a rivalry or a I told you so going on in this matchup that wasn't there for the Super Bowl. There is also the fact that the Chiefs defense looks a little bit different this time around than it has in past matchups. And the biggest difference that we are seeing from the Chiefs defense is just how good they have been against the run so far this season. If you think about past matchups, even if we go to the Super Bowl, right? And in the commentary, thinking back in the matchup and the back and forth was what aligns for the 49ers. And this was true for all the other previous matchups as well, is that the 49ers are a very effective ground team with an awesome run game scheme. And the Chiefs' biggest weakness for all of these matchups has been defending the run. It's been their biggest issue. Now, I would argue it's turned into a strength for Kansas City. And with McCaffrey not active for this game and the status of Jordan Mason unclear, I would say that the 49ers run scheme is perhaps the weakest it has ever been in any of these matchups that they have had against the Kansas City Chiefs. And so it's like there's the one fastball for the 49ers that is now kind of countered. Another thing that the 49ers have done very well with in terms of a matchup perspective is these condensed formations out of heavier personnel where they're putting their wide receivers in quick matchups outside, trying to win those to open up plays and opportunities after the catch. So far this season for the 49ers, all of the after the catch stuff has not been as effective as it has been in years past. And I think the Chiefs, with the personnel that they had in the Super Bowl, showed that they can defend that physicality of the outside wide receivers really well with the current guys that they have on the defense. And I think that that's something that's shown true so far this season as well. And so the defensive matchup perhaps has a little bit more motivation than might be labeled on the outside, given the back and forth these two teams had in the offseason and Kansas City and those guys trying to prove something. But also there's, I think, a decent sized edge here for the Chiefs and how great they've been at defending the run so far this season, which is new in this matchup. On the other side of the football, that's where this game gets a little bit tougher for Kansas City, because the Chiefs are now forcing themselves back into the 2 and 3 tight end set team that we saw a year ago, which even in the game before the bye, we saw them using 4 tight ends against the Saints. If we think about the 49ers defense and this group of linebackers led by Fred Warner, they're very well equipped to defend and handle that. Now, it is important to watch the news of the safeties and the injuries the 49ers are dealing with at that position, as that's going to go a long way to defending this. And I don't think the Seattle game is a good gauge, because the Seahawks sit in 3 wide receiver sets and spread things out, and it's a very different look for what you're getting defensively. But in this matchup, the Chiefs don't really have the personnel to stress areas of the 49ers defense that other offensives have had success doing. So it's a tricky matchup in the sense that the Chiefs are this evolving offense that we don't quite know what we're getting from, and we don't quite know what level of play they can sustain. And then on the other side, it's the 49ers' typical strength impacted now by injuries, but going up against a great Chiefs defense. And so on one hand, you look at this and it's Chiefs out of the bye getting points. You kind of want to bet into that. On the other side, it's a big unknown about the offense in this matchup against the 49ers, that whether or not that game against the Saints and a much different caliber of defensive opponent was making the offense look a lot better than it was. And now this is reverting back. And so we didn't end up doing anything in this game specifically. We didn't have a release on it. We didn't bet it. And it's a pass and a stay away, which was a surprise to me because I did think that was going to play out differently. But it's just a game and a tough week overall where there's not a lot to look at or say. Jets -2 with a total of 38 on the road at the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think it's an odd time that the Steelers made the quarterback switch. I don't get it. I don't know why this week is the one that they specifically wanted to do it. When I look at the Steelers' schedule, they face the Giants next week. The Giants with Shane Bowen have been playing a ton of man or zone coverage, pardon me. In this matchup, where I'm going with this is we've already heard it in the presser from Mike Tomlin this week, where he was asked, can Russell Wilson provide mobility in the same way that Justin Fields did in the pocket? And he downplayed it. And obviously the answer is no. Why I think it matters in this game so much and why I find the choice unusual is the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to be playing a third string center in this game. The only pass rush the Jets have shown all season long has been from the interior of the defensive line. There is a real chance that the Jets can, for the first time in many weeks, generate a bit of a pass rush in this spot without having to blitz and leave themselves exposed. And why would the Pittsburgh Steelers not want the more mobile quarterback of the two options playing behind a third string center to navigate that huge matchup disadvantage? I don't know. I'm not sure what the thought process was behind that. As I look at this matchup and potential Jets injuries on the defensive side with Reed, which would be substantial if he's not able to play, as he's been playing at a very high level so far this season. But like, the Steelers haven't been beating teams with a downfield passing attack that's having a lot of success outside the numbers. It's where they've been targeting a lot. But I mean, putting Russell Wilson back in the pocket with interior pressure, we know he's going to throw outside the numbers because Russell Wilson has not gone out of his way to target the middle of the field. When we think about where the Bills had success against the Jets and the Vikings had success against the Jets, it was a lot of usage with running backs and targeting the middle of the field. That's where there's turning out to be a bit of a problem because the outside corners for the Jets are so physical and handsy. They've been very good all season. Russell Wilson just doesn't target the middle of the field. He hasn't his entire career. And so in this game, not only is he dealing with the interior pressure, but he's going to have to throw to areas of the field he's not typically comfortable doing, and he's going to have to navigate these outside corners, which match up very well against the Steelers' offense. I don't get the decision to do it. I really don't. I think if this was a Fields game for Pittsburgh, it would be a much more difficult matchup for the Jets defense than it might be with Russell Wilson under center. Now, for the Jets offensive side, the addition of Devontae Adams is great. He's going to be starting. He's going to be playing. It's a positive. It's an upgrade. We saw the price tick up a little bit. I agree with all of that. In this game specifically, I don't know what we're going to get from the Jets offense because the big issue that the Jets have had is facing the blitz and facing pressure. Think to the Broncos game. Think to the Vikings game. Everything those teams did up front with their front seven gave the Jets a ton of trouble and really slowed down this offense. And it's clear that Aaron Rodgers is not 100%. He's dealing with something on the leg, whether it's the knee or the ankle. He's not 100%. So that mobility that he showed in like the Pats game, for example, it's not there. It's not going to be there this game. I don't think it's a stretch for the Steelers to replicate what the Broncos and Vikings did from a pressure scheme package up front with the personnel they have to get pressure on the Jets. And what that is going to do is very likely speed up the Jets into this quick passing game that they continue to work with. It's probably going to encourage it. Last week, there was a promising side where The Jets introduced a ton of motion, 72%, something that they need to do pre-snap. But in this game, can the Jets consistently win often enough with these short and quick passes? And can they get Breece Hall involved enough to negate some of this rush with screen passes and create mismatches and sustain that over a game? Because I don't believe that the Jets are going to be able to run the football on the Steelers defensive front. And so in this matchup, I don't think it's as clear-cut for the Jets as it might seem with the addition of Devontae Adams. And we might see the Jets' full offensive outburst from the new addition show itself next week as they go into Foxborough and play the Pats. This seems like a tough matchup for them where the Steelers can do what's really given the trouble to the Jets offense all season long. So I've seen guys earlier in the week already come in on Pittsburgh, but today the wave of money has been on the Jets, pushing this number up and out. Action Sports Central says this is going to be a major pros versus Joe's game. I completely agree with that too. So another game that's really tough to get to a side or a total. And here's another one that's really tough to get to a side or total as well. It's the Ravens 3.5 with a total of 48 on the road at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Hardest game for me to handicap on the board. When I start to look at the Buccaneers, I have to certainly think their defense has caught a lot of breaks so far this season. Todd Bowles excels at putting together game plans against young quarterbacks. With the way the schedule has broken so far this season, the defense for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have faced 3 different rookie quarterbacks. 2 of them have had to happen to make their debut against Todd Bowles and this defense. Now, I know the Buccaneers defense has dealt with a lot of injuries, and so it puts some noise into this number. But if we're being realistic and we're looking at this, in the one game that the Buccaneers faced an offense that wasn't without their top 2 wide receivers, and the Philadelphia Eagles, Hurts was without Smith and Brown, and that was the throwaway game before the bye. The Bucs defense has effectively faced one healthy offense led by a veteran quarterback all season and conceded 550 yards. That was to the Atlanta Falcons on Thursday Night Football. The Baltimore Ravens, I think they're the best offense in football so far through 6 weeks. So even though the Buccaneers are getting healthier on defense, I mean, the step up in class here is monumental, going from the ease of schedule that has been faced by the Buccaneers to what they're going to face in this Ravens offense. And so as I'm looking at this, it's like the Ravens should get pretty much anything that they want on offense. If there's going to be a lot of blitz thrown at Lamar, he's proven since the playoffs last year and into this year, he can beat it. If it's going to be the Bucs selling out against a run game, there's options for the Ravens to exploit that. What I've been so impressed with by the Ravens so far this season is they've won in so many different ways. They've won in those heavy ground game, just get going downhill styles with the heavier personnel. They've shown they can do that against multiple teams. They've shown they can win when there's pressure brought against them and throwing the football. They've shown they can win in straight drop back scenarios. It's a really hard defense to game plan. And so I think that there's an advantage there. Now, with the Buccaneers offense, they've been very good at generating explosive plays. And the one thing that the Ravens defense has really struggled with is preventing those explosive plays. And so as I think about a spot where there's a lot of positives for laying a number on a road with a team like Baltimore, if you get the Ravens with the lead in this spot on the road, a team that's been known to kind of sit conservatively on leads and give away deficits, and you have a defense whose Achilles heel so far has been giving up those giving up those big explosive plays in the pass game, and you have a Bucs offense that's really good when forced to chase and really good at generating explosive plays in any game state, that's not a comfortable path to being laying points and get a cover in a matchup where you need to win by margin on the road. So that's a little bit concerning too. Jeffrey brings up a point that I glazed over a little bit here is the Bucs played against Detroit. Detroit moved the football up and down the field. They were, I think, 1 of 7 in the red zone. I know that scoreboard said 16 points. That was a game that yardage wise and how often Detroit was in the red zone. I mean, the Lions should have been into the 30s in that spot. So I don't love laying this number at this price, given how the Ravens handle leads and given how explosive the Bucs can be on offense. And so it's another game for me that, despite there being a pretty clear side, it's going to be a pass for me. Now, what was not a pass was this game for us, as it was the one game that we have released so far this week. We played the over earlier in the week at 42. We are now out. I see 43.5 at Chris Buckeye Bet Online. When I did the banners an hour and a half ago, it had 44. At 43.5, I would still be excited about the over. If I'm being honest, at the 42, we had a debate internally on whether or not this was more than the standard 1-unit release because we like the over that much in this matchup. And so at 43.5, it's certainly still good below the key of 44. And so a lot of conviction here. Like this quite a bit. Herbert is being allowed to throw the football more. He's healthier. He looked a lot different in the pocket last week. His tackles are back, and that makes a massive difference too, because now there's time for him in the pocket. And we're seeing a bit of an offensive shift slowly happen for the Chargers. They started the season with this aggressive, overwhelming, overpowering run game attack. Part of that was to play into the Greg Roman scheme and system. Part of that was to protect Justin Herbert. Then they dealt with the tackle injuries. Now everything's reverting back, and we're seeing Herbert allowed to throw more, and that's something that is going to increase week by week. In this matchup, the Chargers get whatever they want. Bilal Nichols was the best interior defender for the Arizona Cardinals. He got hurt last week. He is out. Kaiser White is the linebacker that flies around and makes plays in the hole. He is dealing with an injury, has a chance to miss. In total, the Cardinals lost 4 defensive guys last week in game. A lot of those injuries are trending in a negative direction, but losing Nichols up front is a problem. They still don't have their best pass rushers who are on IR. It's a zone defense that plays very soft, that plays passive, allows opportunity. If the Chargers want to run the football, it's there all day. If they want Herbert to drop back and throw it more, which I think that they will, he's going to have success in this spot as well. In this spot, too, I start to look at just how the Cardinals have struggled to defend similar style offenses. Buffalo, personnel and scheme-wise, what they did in week 1, very similar to what the Chargers do. That game got flying over the total. That Lions game had a total in the high 50s. It was a second half with 4th down failed conversions where the game died out on the heels of potential defensive adjustments, but the Lions moved the ball very comfortably. The Commanders' ground game had a ton of success against this Cardinals defense. And so behind this Chargers offensive line, I think everything's in play here for LA to move the football. Now, defensively for the Chargers, Jesse Minter's getting a lot of praise. In some ways, rightfully so. I think he's a great coordinator going forward. But I start to look at kind of the schedule here. Against the Chiefs, I know he held them to 17 points. The Chiefs put up 330 yards. There were some plays there that should have resulted in more Chiefs points being scored. But when we're talking about the schedule of opposing quarterbacks faced for this Chargers defense, they faced Bryce Young, who is no longer starting. They faced Gardner Minshew, who is no longer starting. They faced Justin Fields, who is no longer starting. They faced Bo Nix, who's a rookie quarterback. I mean, it's been as easy and simple as it gets for the Chargers defense, and I think it's fair to say we're probably looking at a Chargers defense that is quite overrated at this point with how low some of these totals are being priced in. The Cardinals offense has really stalled out the last couple of weeks, but Cardinals offense going on the road to play the 49ers outdoors and then going on the road to play the Packers outdoors, that's a much different spot than being at home facing this Chargers defense. And so the Chargers returning home, being back indoors, being back on the faster surface, against this Chargers defense, which is a big step down in class, potentially quite overrated too. I think sets up really well for the Arizona Cardinals offense as well. And so to me, this is an over game for sure. And at 43.5, I would still absolutely be looking towards that at the current number, even though, again, we did release it at a much better number. And I have to remind everybody, if you are interested in following the releases, raspicks.com is where you can go. 33, 23, and 2, 58.9% so far on the season. As everyone is still here, before you go, subscribe button is down below, like button is down below. If there's anything that you have taken away so far from the show that made you think differently or you might consider using to help inform your bets on Sunday, would very much appreciate it if you show the channel some support and hit the subscribe button down below and hit the like button too. Just want to catch up with the final questions before we get out. If you do have any more, let me know in the live chat. I'll get to them. I know there's been a lot of back and forth so far in the chat. Lots of great game comments or people replying to each other more so than just answering me questions too. I'm trying to see if there's any standout questions that I can get to. Robbie says the QB change seems so unlike Tomlin. Feels like this is coming from ownership. If someone can explain it to me, I would love to know. I don't get it given the circumstance and how the season has gone as well. Drewski says, then why Chargers ain't -4.5? That would be a pretty ridiculous number to get to the Chargers at 4.5. I could certainly say that the Chargers are at a slight premium in this spot, as I'm looking at model numbers that we have 1.5, 1.5, -1.5. And so at 2.5, they're already bumped up a little bit, I think reflective of the matchup, but to get to 4.5, I can't get there too. I know that you had the Cardinals on the money line. Again, I'm not advocating for Chargers side. I'm advocating for the over. And so I didn't mean that in a way to disagree with the bet that you had or made. If that was how it came across, that was not the intention. But I was just kind of looking at the over in this spot. Crazy Carl says, any pacing consideration for the Chargers and Cardinals total? I know that the team has played quite slow, and that would be a concern when you're looking at the over. Something that I would say is that if we see either of these teams pushed, which is something we haven't seen a ton of, that's when you get a bit of an uptick in pace. And so this game being played at home indoors, if we see either side pushed, I think that's going to make the pace for both teams play different. Sean, I know you've been asking this a few times. Still high on the Philly offense? No. I don't know what's going on in Philly, and I don't like that things haven't changed. I don't like that things have not adjusted, and I don't like that things have reverted back to how they were and how they operated a year ago. So no, I do not like that. And Roger says, the look on Murray's face told me he wanted to be anywhere but playing football. Well, I mean, we've seen that from him a lot of times when he goes outdoors. There's a bit of rain in that game. There were some elements playing it as well. And so that's pretty normal as well. But I wouldn't wouldn't disagree or wouldn't agree with the fact he doesn't want to be out there playing football. But I do think it looks better at home in this spot. Roger Long says, sorry about the Caps. You were just very passionate to say Kyler Murray did not want to play football. Johnny C says, Kamara over 33.5 receiving yards. Thoughts? I have none on props. I've spent less attention looking at props than I ever have in a single season in my entire life of NFL this year. So I don't have any prop thoughts on that. Typically, I do not like playing players at their position to do something that their position does not do. I know Kamara would be a bit of an exception in that role, but I don't have any thoughts there for that one specifically. All right, hour and 23 minutes. Long card, long show, lots to talk about, not a lot of bets. We're kind of in the ebb and flow of the season. I think back to last year, it would go show with a lot of thoughts and a lot of conviction, show with not too much going on, show with a lot of thoughts, a lot of conviction, show with not a lot going on. And so, as always, I'll try to share as much info as I can and give you everything that I can think about or everything that I can share to come away and take away with decisions that might help you make. But in terms of this week, not a whole lot of looks, not a whole lot of chances to take as well. Last question before we get out from Owen Turner. How's your golf handicap looking? Have dropped 11 strokes from last year. So last year, first week in November, I started working with a coach. Have dropped 11 strokes since. I'm closing in on scratch. Not quite there yet, just because of play from 50 to 100 yards. The last few weeks since the season started, I haven't gone back to any lessons as well, and I've only been out for 3 9-hole rounds late on Fridays. And so I've dialed back the game a little bit here, but as the season sets into a bit of a more consistent routine as we get into November again, I'm probably going to get back into that as well. But it has been a monster turnaround for the golf game in 2024, just figuring out what to do with the speed that I have and harness that into a game that translates to more control on the course. And so finally found the coach who gets what I can do and how I do. And she has been amazing at dialing things in on the course. If I can ever figure out, it's effectively like 70 to 110 yards, basically like from a half 60 to a full 56 has been the big issue that I've been suffering just proximity wise. And so we've been working quite a bit on just trying to get those flighted downs and hold those a little bit closer and tighter in proximity to score a bit better. Once I get that, I think I'll finally get the golf game to a level that I've been trying to get to for several years. But getting close to scratch and dialing it in and getting much more confident on the course as well. That'll do it for me today. Have a fantastic Wednesday, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the week. And as always, I'll be back here on the channel each and every morning with a new episode of the podcast. Hope you enjoyed the show. Thanks again for stopping by. We'll chat to you on the next episode.